Hi, everybody. Stop holding back on your business growth is our topic for today. And I'm joined again by Graham Potts, who's Chartered Accountant and Managing Director at our accountancy practice, Wessex Commercial. Graham's got a great eye for numbers and years of hands-on experience in business. So he's great at spotting the changes that you can make to increase profits. And as we go through today, as we're on live, pop any questions in the chat and we'll try and pick them up either during the session or towards the end. So Graham, we're talking about people who are holding back on business growth. I wonder, surely business owners instinctively know when to push sales?
Thank you, Linda, and hi everyone. The answer is not always. Everybody often has a good gut instinct. But the trouble is we're surrounded by noise, lots of noise. And that's noise with lots of information coming in, and that information can be good, bad. I mean, if you go onto Google, we all know there's a lot of misinformation on there. It's also the advice. How many times have you heard, my mate down the pub told me something? So it's very hard as a business owner with everything else going on to actually know what's happening in your business absolutely spot on. And you need to have up-to-date financial management information that actually helps you make the right decisions. Yeah. Because those right decisions and knowing what drives your business is key.
I mean, is there anything wrong with sort of staying where you are in your business?
I would say not as the end result, because if you want to say make 50,000 a year and that's what you want to make, that's fine. But how that 50,000 is made up keeps on changing. Competitors are always out there looking to improve. They're looking to take customers, and they could be yours. They're looking at locations. They could pop across the road somewhere. They're looking at management. They sometimes will take your management, your staff away. Everybody's fighting for the same sort of resources. So even if you don't want to grow, you still need to review all these things: your customers, your products, your services, your supply chain, that's your suppliers, your staff, how are they doing? Your locations, your markets. It's a constant, you have to keep up together with it. Otherwise, you are likely to fall back.
Yeah. And I think now, perhaps more than ever, Graham, that's the case. We're operating in really difficult markets. I know you've got lots of stories to share with us. Can you perhaps give us an example of a situation where someone wasn't pushing ahead with growth and perhaps they should have been?
Yeah, I've got a lot of stories. As anybody who knows me can talk their hind ass off a donkey, as they say. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say those things, but anyway. Right. We had a client, and the impression was that they shouldn't grow. They were under an illusion that if sales went up, profits wouldn't grow that much. And they felt that they had to, because they were in a contracting type business, they felt the hassle wasn't worth it because it was more people. And I think we all know what that's like at the moment. So basically, they were at a point where they were actually earning less than they would if they were employed. They were quite high profile. They could have got a decent job, which was affecting their relationship with their husband, because they were working longer hours from what they deserved, and the money wasn't, the accounts weren't showing good profits. So basically, they came to us for help and just to understand whether there was any, viability in pushing sales, or what they should do, or should they just sell up and stop and take a job.
And what was the sort of solution to that, being in that situation? Because I guess you didn't say take the paid job.
No. You've got to understand. The client wanted to stay in business.
Yeah.
They just, often we all go through it. We feel that we've not fully achieved, and they felt they hadn't achieved where they wanted to be. So we undertook a full review of the business.
Yeah.
We delved into the numbers. They were on zero, so that was good. But although there's zero, it wasn't probably set up as well as it should have been. But it was still, it was there. Looked at how it was, but like a lot of businesses, they hadn't separated the costs out correctly.
Okay.
So by that, I mean, like this, for instance, staff. Does staff go above the line? That's in the direct costs, or go in overheads.
Yeah.
Now, some staff are chargeable out and they should be in direct. So if, for instance, you have a sale, and if you weren't going to have that sale, you wouldn't have that member of staff,
Yeah.
then they should be in direct costs, and your overhead are the people that's not chargeable. That wasn't done. So that was the first thing to look at.
Yeah.
I always use the 80-20 rule, which I think businesses should spend 20% of your time to look at 80% of the information, or the cost. In this case, the cost. And the predominant cost was staff, the location where they were based, and traveling time.
Yeah.
That was 3 big costs. So we split the wages and travel time into whether it should be above the line, I say above the gross profit line, or below overhead, which meant that the gross profit increased a lot more than what they were told by their previous accountant. We then looked in deeper, because that's just one part of it. That just gives the right information, but it's still the end result was still the same. So we had to look at how do we improve that result. So the first thing was you look at what can we do with the staff, right? The actual overhead. So we looked at that, and they could take on more work without taking on more overhead. So we looked at how that percentage was, and it was roughly, say, 50%. So we thought, right, we'll look at growing. So next thing we looked at was looking at the routes and how they did it. Now, I'll give you an example. And this could be any like contracting type of business. If you're going out to do the job, and let's take a plumber. You get a plumber, and he goes and does a job. Looking around Somerset at the moment, he takes a job in Taunton, then he goes to Wellington, then he has to go back to Yeovil, and then actually has a job down in Exeter. And those are 1-hour jobs. He's only worked 4 hours. You've got to try and find the work in the same location at the same sort of time, because basically, if you're traveling, you're not earning. That's what we did. We suggested staff efficiencies in the routes. We looked at where the clumps were, where the staff were, where the potential work we could get, and we tried to match that up so people were not spending a lot of time traveling. We also looked to see if they could be there for longer, for more time on site, because they were charged out by the hour. We also looked at the contracts and looked at, sort of some government contracts they could increase because minimum wage was going up, and that affected the whole wage structure. So we looked at how to increase prices as well. So basically a full review around those contracts, the pricing, how much money they were earning, and where they were earning the money.
And the biggest thing, it sounds like, was that P&L was quite misleading. Depending on where the data was on the profit and loss report. Having made those changes, what impact did that have? How did that business move forward, Graham?
Well, obviously, a lot of changes can be instant. It's mindset. And it took a time. It wasn't the client, it was a management team and staff, and it took time to do it. And also, you come up with different, we came up with 5-6 points. It takes time. You can't implement everything at once. So we looked at what we thought was the biggest wins to start with. So we looked at it, and the client implemented one at a time. And it took like each point took like, say, 3-4 months to go through. Initially, there was a bit of pushback by certain people. There was a change, in a couple of members of the team, but within a couple of years, sales had increased and profits had increased as well. The gross margin had gone up to just above the 50% line. And, sales had gone up 40-50% without increasing overhead more than 10%.
And how did the client feel about that?
The client was very much more in control of the business. They felt, well, first of all, they were earning more. So they felt comfortable that they could, they felt that they could take a break, take some breaks.
And not under pressure to take a job.
They're not under the pressure. Exactly. They were not under the pressure to take the job because they were earning more than they would if they were employed.
Yeah.
Also, they were gaining value in the business because the business was worth more.
Yeah.
Because initially, when we got involved, the net assets were minimal and the profits were low, in which case, you're near enough giving it away. Yeah. Whereas now the profits increased drastically and they were leaving money in the business as well as taking a decent dividend. But it was basically growing and it was getting more valuable for someone who wanted to come in.
Yeah.
If they wanted to buy it, if they wanted to sell. And also they felt they could, because we made some tweaks on Xero about what there was in the dashboard and how to keep control of the business. So when they're away, they felt in control, whereas before they didn't feel in control.
Yes.
So it's like, you've got, it's on your phone, so they can look through. So we made sure that was.
It's on your phone and it's reliable information as well, which is, which is great. Brings me on to my next question about changes you'd recommend. But before we get onto that, Graham, Catherine's just commented about quick wins first.
Yes.
It sounds like you can certainly make those quick changes. And actually, one of the things that we can do is to help people get their accounts information into shape quite quickly. What you then do with that takes that little bit longer. But
I would say also, Linda, I would say there that you've got to be, you look at things and it's the amount of time, it's going to be the least resistance to the change, the least time with the maximum effect. Yeah. And that's what we did. We turned it around, like Catherine was saying, we turned it around. So we're looking, again, the 80-20 rule. When you look at the big wins, what's going to make the biggest difference? What's going to take the least time that actually to implement? And then people see it, because the quick wins, if they see something, they go, and they start to trust and believe.
Yeah. So what steps and what changes would you recommend the business owners make?
Probably trying to break it down into 3 items. For number 1, I always say, understand your numbers.
Yeah.
Most people that are probably watching this have watched Dragon's Den at some time, and you realize that sometimes people understand their numbers on there and sometimes they don't. But understand your numbers. And if you don't, have someone you trust and be careful to make sure they are aligned to what you're wanting. Because I've seen some people that aren't as trustworthy as they should be. But basically have someone who you trust that can help you to understand those numbers and give you those numbers so that you actually can help with the business, drive the business. Second, analyze your costs correctly into direct costs and overhead, so you do know your margin. It's so important to understand what that gross margin percentage is. Yeah. How many times we've seen business owners imagine not believing what comes through, how they price against what is in the accounts. You need to make sure you understand why it's different.
And just to be clear, the reason that we need to know our gross margins in each part of the business is so that we're growing a business that has potential, as opposed to growing a business that isn't really going to make you a lot of profit.
Yeah, and often businesses have different customers, different markets, and they're making different margins. So the account might say you're making 30% margin, but you might be making 50% somewhere and 10% the other.
Yeah.
And actually, when you put the overhead against it, you're actually losing money.
Yeah.
So you need to understand where you're making money and where you're not. And you have to chunk it so it's not difficult. You don't make it too complicated, but you don't have it always just in one pot, but you try and break it into 3-5 pots so that people can see and actually understand where you're making that money.
Yeah.
So that's, and we recommend Xero, obviously, that's, goes out saying we believe Xero is the best by far for a small business. Thirdly, consider your resources and when to maximize all your resources and when you may need to increase your resources. Mm-hmm. So for instance, your overheads, staff. So when do you need to increase that, take that extra staff person on? Mm-hmm. For instance, if you're going to take a member, you want to take a salesman on, and he's going to cost you, all in cost with everything else, 50,000, or salesperson, so I should say, sorry. 50,000, if your margin's only, say, 25%, you have to be making basically 50,000 divided by 0.25, which is 200,000 sales. And that's excluding any cash effect in that before it's worth taking them on. Mm-hmm. Seriously consider when to take what resource on and maximize what you've got. Maximize the staff, make sure they're doing what they should be doing. Are they doing things that actually, if you cut, it won't affect the business and gives you more time so you don't have to take someone else on?
Yeah.
Same with stock, which obviously we come into the next one, next LinkedIn Live. It's all about business making tweaks, and it's the compound effect of those tweaks can be massive on a business.
So, yeah, small changes, big impact.
Exactly.
We kind of hinted at this earlier, but I mean, does it make sense to look at those things, even if you're in a business where you're thinking, do I really want to be running a bigger organization? Does it still make sense to do that? To go and to look at data?
As we said, it did. The world's changing. We're in uncertain and lonely. It is really lonely running the business. You need good management information, because if you don't change, you'll get pushed aside, because competitors are changing. Customers are always looking for something different. They get poached by others. Yeah. Sort of same with staff. We all know there's problems with staff. So really, you have to understand the numbers that will give you confidence to make the right decisions. Doesn't mean you have to grow, but it may mean, as I said earlier, you make a pot of money, but how you make that pot and how much time you put in that changes as you go through. It does help to know where and when to increase your resources, including your time, or decrease.
Yeah.
And it also helps with getting a business ready for sale.
Yeah.
Which you need a lot of time, basically, to actually make sure it's actually in its right place and gives you the money you want, for your retirement or for your next project.
Yeah. Kelly's just jumped on and said, love that, small change, big impact. And I sometimes feel when we're talking, Graham, that we are talking about such simple changes, and I get frustrated that business owners are sometimes being given information that, when it's not analysed correctly for them, isn't telling them a story, isn't telling this an accurate story that they need to be able to start making those changes in their business.
Exactly. It's not rocket science, Linda. It is not rocket science. Business it's often simple little changes that sometimes in your gut, sometimes you don't. But actually having the right information, if you've got the right management information, it helps you to make those right decisions, and will basically say if your gut's right or not. But it's, like Kelly said, small changes, big impact is absolutely definite. Yeah.
So if people want to talk about what they can do in their business, can they set up a meeting with you, Graham?
Yeah, definitely. If any of this, if it resonates with you, direct message me. If you go on LinkedIn, I've got my contact details, my phone number. By the way, I do get a lot of spam calls, so send me a text or whatever, or WhatsApp or whatever you want. Direct message me on LinkedIn. And I'll set up a time to talk. Maybe meet or whatever if it's in the area. Video call. No obligation. Happy to help wherever I can.
Yeah. And we popped the email address on the screen. Chat with Graham at wessexcommercial.com, and you'll get that meeting set up. So next time we're talking about how hard your stock is working for your business. I'm looking forward to this one. Just to understand how people can make changes to the way they manage the stock, and how that will impact on their profitability. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and got just one last piece of feedback, really insightful, particularly around the implications of understanding your numbers and how small tweaks can make big differences in a business. So I love that. On small hinges, swing big doors. There you go.
That is a very good saying. I might have to pinch that one. So thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks everybody for joining us, and
we look
forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. Bye.